Hundreds of supporters of the President of the Democratic Republic of Congo have expressed their elation at the announcement of the dissolution of the ruling coalition. President Tshisekedi announced on Sunday that the coalition parliamentary group, Cach-FCC, Common Front for Congo between Tshisekedi and his predecessor, Joseph Kabila. The announcement came after the failure of a coalition with supporters of predecessors Joseph Kabila, who currently wields a majority in parliament. In his state-owned RTNC televised speech on Sunday, President Felix Tshisekedi also stated his plan to form a new coalition government and warned that he might be forced to dissolve parliament and hold fresh elections if he was unable to do so. Kabila held power in the DRC for 18 years until he stepped down after long-delayed elections in December 2018. The former leader still retains considerable clout, though, by way of political allies and officials that he's appointed to the armed forces, and he's also a senator for life. Channel Africa producer and journalist, African Affairs analyst Nixon Katembo joins us now via Zoom for a little bit more on this story. Thanks so much, Nixon. Always good to talk to you. I suppose if one has been tracking events in the DRC, the president's announcement on Sunday perhaps wasn't a surprise.
Indeed, Peter, this wasn't a surprise, and to many pundits, it was bound to happen given the past 2 years that there has been, pull and push in terms of who controlled the levers of power in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And finally, I think the president's coalitions and his henchmen have had enough, and they decided to go either ways by organizing first what they called the Union Sacred Union for the Congolese people by doing consultations that took almost 3 weeks, and then after that it culminated in the address of the president.
What can the president do? Are there enough other actors in parliament to be able to form another coalition, or are we likely to see another election?
Well, let's not quickly run to whether the president can form elections or have enough support. And I think it's worth to mention that this is a culmination of a long, protracted political gymnastics that have been happening in the DRC owing to the much failed elections of 2018, where a deal between Kabila and Tshisekedi was reached at the back and against the will of the Congolese people. And what is happening now is a culmination of that deal going sour, and both parties just thumping of having the support of the majority of the people. But what we see is that I think the president having managed to control some sort of levers of power within the Democratic Republic of Congo, especially with the army and the political process within that country, now have a leeway to sort of trying to wrestle control of the majority in parliament in order to form a government. Whether he can form that government constitutionally, I don't think that he have a way to form that government, because he does still have not the majority of parliamentarians supporting him, unless there are defections within the coalition FCC. And on the other hand, if you would recall, his party, or Cach as a coalition, has only 47 MP out of 450, whereas Kabila have over 320, which forms the majority. And constitutionally speaking, this means the Kabila coalition can go it alone if it so wished to do. But of course, the president, under Article 78 of the DRC Constitution, he has the mandate to either dissolve parliament and call for fresh elections. Whether he will go that route, it's an issue that remains to be seen. However, in my own analysis, I think this is likely to now deepen the political crisis in the country.
A lot can happen and has happened in 2 years since 2018's elections. Does former President Kabila still enjoy the kind of support that is represented in Parliament at this stage?
Well, the representation in the parliament is still a questionable, Peter. The majority of the Congolese people whom we have interacted with do not recognize the current majority in parliament because they are well aware that this was an arranged election, and MPs that are in that parliament under Kabila coalition, to many Congolese, they know too well that this is an arranged coalition after the circumventing the will of the people who overwhelmingly voted against Joseph Kabila and his ruling coalition FCC. But whether that is going to hold in the coming days is still to remain to be seen. Otherwise, if one go on the ground and ask many Congolese people, they do not agree with what is happening. And in fact, they voted against the Kabila's 18 years in power, and they wanted to see his back. Unfortunately for the Congolese people, it's only the deal that was signed between Tshisekedi and Kabila that gave Kabila a lease of life in the political process in the country. And unfortunately for the DRC is that you have some critical power, regional power in East Africa. You have Kenya, in north of Africa you have Egypt, and in southern Africa you have South Africa. Both President Uhuru Kenyatta, Cyril Ramaphosa, and Abdel Fattah al-Sisi of Egypt witnessed the signing between the Kabila and Tshisekedi as they made the deal of sharing power, without consideration of the will of the Congolese majority. And this is coming to bite because the difference between Kabila and Tshisekedi have reached a boiling point that they cannot repair anymore. And this is why you would see that in the previous weeks, the former president has to dispatch diplomats to remind those who were guarantor of the signing of the deal between the two leaders, and wrote to the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres, reminding him how far the Congo has come. But what is underlying factor here is both in a political process in the country. It's very unfortunate that the Congolese politicians have not respected their own constitutions, and let alone forming institutions of the state that go beyond and work for the Congolese people, and go beyond in serving the interest of the people rather than serving the interests of the ruling elite. And what we see is that everyone who come to power in the Congo try to consolidate power so that he can, rule the country. And that's what we see the president Tshisekedi taking over from Kabila and trying to use the same yardstick that Kabila used before in trying to maximize power so that he can rule the country for himself. And that started obviously with the appointment of the 3 constitutional judges to the constitutional bench, which started as a problem that triggered much of the difference between the two coalitions. And both are well aware that whoever controls the constitutional court and control the electoral commission, independent electoral commission, is likely to be the determining factor in the 2023 general election. So it's a power play here, Peter, and one would really watch closely on what is going to happen, because already those two key institutions of the state are at loggerhead in the entire political processes of what is happening in the country.
All right, one gets a sense, and especially with what you said earlier about a deepening crisis, that what happens in the next few weeks may likely shape Congolese politics for some time to come. With that in mind, I want to ask you, is there a way back for voices such as Martin Fayulu?
The voices are there, and if you look at the consultation that the president had, I think they have, categorically told him that, look, we voted against this Kabila Joseph clicks out. It's upon the deal that you signed with him that we have reached where we are, and now we are having a political gridlock. Hence, many Congolese politicians and those in a civil society were calling for a reform at the Electoral Commission and organizing a new general elections. And I think if the president dissolved the election, the National Assembly, you will likely to see Martin Fayulu and his coalition partners within Lamuka emerging big, having their victory been stolen in the past elections. So Martin Fayulu has maintained his point that he knows too well that he won the elections. However, the time is moving, and it's 2 years now that Tshisekedi is in his term. One look ahead on how the organization of the upcoming elections in 2023 will look like, with all this political maneuvering happening between the two coalitions, which were former comrade in the government.
Yeah. One of the phenomena on the continent as well is often the power that is wielded by the military. And I just wonder, in the DRC, are they still influential, and under whose influence are they at the moment?
Well, the DRC army still sort of an agglomeration of different militia factions since the war erupted in 1996, and you have seen that different factions of rebel group comes in and they get integrated in the army, and much of those has been under the control of Joseph Kabila, who has been in power for the past 18 years. But in the past 2 years, there has been some changes. I think Tshisekedi noticed that this is a crucial point that he need to, move fast in having the military on his side. And just about a week, this past week, he summoned the major leaders, critical commanders within the army and the national police, and they signed allegiance to him as a commander-in-chief. Whether this is reflecting to the ordinary soldiers and the police officers within the Congolese armed forces and the security forces, to remain to be seen. However, in my own reading of the situations, I think Kabila still holds much of the power within the military. And there are two other dynamics to it, is that you have the international also community, pulling the string behind the scene. The United States, in this case, through its ambassador Mike Hammer, have been very vocal on saying that their army officers who committed the atrocity in the national army, therefore they should be pursued by the current government. And the United States recently established a military cooperation between the DRC under Tshisekedi government, and they are opening a military base in Kisangani. This is under AFRICOM. So that tells much of the stake are high in the DRC armed forces, and its loyalty at this point is highly divided. You have, on the other hand, France, which thought that antagonizing Kabila will be a big mistake and it will bring much instability in the country. So you have this superpower pulling the string behind the scenes, and it remains to be seen whether Tshisekedi has consolidated his military support. And you would recall that just recently as a show of might and the military cooperation. He went to Angola and saw President Joao Lorenzo of Angola, and a few days later, Angolan Air Force plane had a joint operation that flew over Kinshasa. So that tells you how much about the maneuvering within the military and the politics of the DRC going forward. And perhaps it was a show of force that to reckon with, and maybe Tshisekedi telling his detractors within the FCC coalition that if you rely on your long history of the military, I also have some clout in the armed forces.
All right, Nixon, that's where we're going to leave it. Thanks very much indeed, mon frère. C'est toujours bon de te parler.
Merci beaucoup.
Okay, à bientôt. All right, that's our colleague from Channel Africa giving us the lowdown on the situation in the DRC, the coalition there, Mr. Tshisekedi, and the former president, Joseph Kabila's party, dissolved on Sunday, but not surprisingly so. So it'll be an interesting time in the coming weeks, just what develops within the DRC. We'll be keeping a tab on that story for sure.